By the late 1980s, Soviet engineers had done something no one else on Earth had ever accomplished. They had drilled more than 7 miles beneath the surface, farther than any human machine had ever gone. Then, everything started going wrong. Temperatures rose far beyond what scientists had predicted. Drill bits twisted apart. Metal equipment began failing. Entire sections of the drill became trapped thousands of meters underground. And before long, a rumor spread around the world. According to the story, the Soviets hadn't just reached the deepest point on Earth. They had heard something waiting below. Some claimed it was thousands of voices screaming from beneath the Earth's crust. Others believed they'd uncovered proof of hell itself. The story became one of the Cold War's most enduring mysteries. But almost none of it was true. Because the real story isn't about demons. It's about humanity's greatest attempt to explore the planet beneath our feet and how the Earth itself fought back. When people think about the Cold War, they usually picture rockets soaring into space, the Apollo missions, Sputnik, the nuclear arms race. But while the United States and the Soviet Union competed above the Earth, another race was happening below it. Scientists had spent centuries mapping mountains, oceans, and deserts. Yet beneath our feet, almost nothing was known. The deeper you travel into the Earth, the less direct evidence exists. Everything geologists believed about the crust came from earthquakes, volcanic rocks, and mathematical models. No one had ever actually seen it. If humanity wanted answers, there was only one way to get them. Drill. And drill deeper than anyone thought possible. The Americans tried first. In 1961, they launched Project Borehole, an ambitious effort to drill through the ocean floor and reach the Earth's mantle. If successful, it would have been one of the greatest scientific achievements in history. Instead, the project collapsed. Costs spiraled out of control. Political disagreements grew worse. Eventually, funding disappeared. Project Borehole was abandoned before it came close to its goal. For most countries, that would have been the end of the dream. For the Soviet Union, it was an opportunity. If America couldn't do it, maybe they could. In May of 1970, Soviet scientists arrived on a remote stretch of land known as the Kola Peninsula, just north of the Arctic Circle. It wasn't chosen because it was convenient. Quite the opposite. The region was isolated, brutally cold, and surrounded by ancient rock formations that had remained largely untouched for billions of years. If there was anywhere on Earth capable of revealing the planet's deepest secrets, this was it. The mission was simple. Drill as deep as technology would allow, not for oil, not for natural gas, but purely for science. They called it the Kola Superdeep Borehole. No one realized they had just begun one of the most ambitious engineering projects in human history. At first, everything went according to plan. The drilling team used equipment similar to what the oil industry had already perfected. Every few hundred meters, they removed the drill string, replaced worn drill bits, and continued downward. Slowly, the hole grew deeper. 1 kilometer, then 3, then 5. Every new record brought excitement. But beneath the surface, the challenge wasn't simply drilling. It was surviving. The deeper the drill traveled, the greater the pressure became. Rock that had remained undisturbed for nearly 3 billion years pushed against every piece of equipment lowered into the earth. Temperatures climbed steadily. Steel weakened. Lubricants began failing. Machines that worked perfectly near the surface suddenly became unreliable. And yet, the Soviets kept going. Every setback forced engineers to invent entirely new technology. New drill bits, new cooling systems, new metal alloys. The project slowly transformed from a geology experiment into one of the greatest engineering challenges ever attempted. Then, in 1979, everything changed. The Kola borehole officially became the deepest artificial point ever created by humanity. For the first time in history, humans had drilled farther into the Earth than anyone thought possible. It was a major scientific victory. Soviet newspapers celebrated it. Scientists around the world watched closely. But reaching the world record wasn't the goal. It was only the halfway point. The team believed they could go much farther. They had no idea what was waiting below. Before drilling began, geologists had made careful predictions. They believed they understood exactly how the Earth's crust was organized. At a certain depth, granite would give way to basalt. Temperatures would rise steadily but remain manageable. Everything fit neatly into decades of geological theory. Then the drill arrived, and reality refused to cooperate. But granite never ended. Kilometer after kilometer, scientists expected basalt to appear. Instead, they found more granite. Entire textbooks suddenly looked questionable. It was the first sign that much of what humanity believed about the deep Earth had been based on incomplete information. But that wasn't the biggest surprise, because hidden inside these ancient rocks, scientists discovered something nobody expected. Tiny microscopic fossils, ancient marine organisms, more than 4 miles beneath the Earth's surface. How could traces of ancient life exist under crushing pressure inside rocks that were billions of years old? The discovery suggested Earth's history was far more complicated than researchers had imagined. Then, they found water. Not underground rivers, not hidden lakes. water trapped inside the crystal structure of minerals themselves. Until then, many geologists didn't think large amounts of water could exist at those depths. Once again, the Earth proved them wrong. Every kilometer forced scientists to rethink another assumption. But none of these discoveries prepared them for the obstacle that would eventually end the project. Because with every meter they drilled, something invisible was getting closer. Heat. For nearly 20 years, the Kola Superdeep Borehole had defied expectations. The drill had survived crushing pressure. It had shattered world records. And it had completely rewritten what scientists thought they knew about the Earth's crust. But one problem refused to go away: temperature. Before the project began, Soviet geologists estimated the bottom of the borehole would reach around 100 degrees Celsius, about the boiling point of water. That sounded difficult, but manageable. Instead, every kilometer brought a surprise. The deeper the drill traveled, the hotter the rock became. By the late 1980s, instruments recorded temperatures approaching 180 degrees Celsius. That's nearly 360 degrees Fahrenheit, almost twice what anyone had predicted. And that changed everything. At those temperatures, the drill wasn't just cutting through rock anymore. It was fighting physics itself. Steel lost much of its strength. Electronic sensors began failing almost immediately after reaching the bottom. Lubricants designed for extreme environments simply burned away. Even the rock changed. Instead of behaving like solid stone, it became soft, almost plastic. Imagine trying to drill through warm chewing gum instead of concrete. Every rotation became unpredictable. The drill string twisted, bits snapped apart. Equipment became trapped thousands of meters underground. Sometimes entire sections had to be abandoned because recovering them would have taken months. Every new meter required weeks of repairs, then months. Eventually, progress slowed to almost nothing. By 1989, after nearly 2 decades of work, the drill finally reached its greatest depth, 12,262 meters, or just over 7.6 miles beneath the surface. To put that into perspective, if Mount Everest were dropped into the hole, its summit would still be more than a mile below ground. It remains the deepest point humanity has ever drilled, and yet, despite all of that effort, scientists had penetrated less than 0.2% of the distance to Earth's center. For all our technology, we had barely scratched the surface. If the story had ended there, the Kola borehole would probably be remembered as an extraordinary scientific achievement. Instead, something else happened. A rumor began spreading. No one knows exactly where it started, but by the late 1980s, stories claimed Soviet scientists had lowered a sensitive microphone into the borehole, not to record voices, but to study underground vibrations. According to the legend, the recording picked up something impossible. Not machinery, not earthquakes, not moving rock. Human voices, thousands of them, all screaming. The story spread incredibly fast. Newspapers repeated it. Radio hosts discussed it. Religious speakers around the world cited it as evidence that hell was a real physical place hidden beneath the Earth's surface. Every retelling made the story even more dramatic. Some versions claim scientists fled the site in panic. Others claim several researchers resigned immediately after hearing the recording. Some even said a supernatural creature escaped from the hole. None of these stories agreed with each other. But that didn't matter. People wanted to believe them. Because the deeper humanity explores, the easier it becomes to imagine we've crossed into places we were never meant to reach. By the early 1990s, copies of the supposed recording began circulating. If you've spent enough time online, you've probably heard it. The audio is unsettling. Layer upon layer of distorted screams echoing through static. Even today, millions of people believe it's authentic. But here's the strange part. No one has ever been able to identify the Soviet scientists who supposedly made the recording. No official documents mention it. No scientific papers describe it. No engineer working at Kola has ever confirmed hearing anything remotely similar. So where did it come from? The answer turns out to be surprisingly ordinary. Researchers eventually traced the famous screaming recording back to an entirely different source. It wasn't captured inside the Kola borehole. It wasn't recorded by Soviet scientists. And it wasn't even made for scientific research. The audio had been lifted from a horror production, heavily edited with echo effects, then falsely presented as evidence from the borehole. As for the story itself, many historians believe it gained popularity after a sensational newspaper article mixed together rumors, religious interpretations, and Cold War speculation. Once enough people repeated it, the legend took on a life of its own. And because the Soviet Union was famously secretive, few people had any way to verify what had actually happened. The mystery filled the gaps. But here's what's fascinating. The truth didn't need ghosts. It didn't need demons. Reality was already extraordinary. Scientists had drilled deeper than anyone in history, discovered fossils where no one expected them, found water locked inside ancient rocks, completely challenged decades of geological theory, and reached temperatures so extreme that modern engineering simply couldn't continue. That alone should have been enough to make history. But one final event would ensure the project never resumed. Not because of anything underground, but because everything above ground was about to change. By the time the Kola Superdeep Borehole reached its maximum depth in 1989, the Soviet Union had poured nearly 20 years into the project. Thousands of engineers had worked on it. Entire teams had dedicated their careers to solving problems that had never existed before. And despite every setback, they still weren't ready to quit. The goal had always been ambitious. Scientists hoped to reach 15 kilometers, nearly 9.5 miles beneath the Earth's surface. It would have been another historic milestone. But the Earth had other plans. The temperatures were simply too extreme. Every attempt to drill deeper destroyed expensive equipment. The deeper they pushed, the less progress they made. What once took weeks now took months. Eventually, the project became too expensive to justify. And then, history intervened. In December of 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. One of the world's two superpowers disappeared almost overnight. The economic crisis that followed forced the new Russian government to make impossible decisions. Scientific projects that had once symbolized national pride suddenly became financial burdens. Funding for the Kola Superdeep Borehole dried up. Without money, without replacement equipment, and without technology capable of surviving the heat, the project quietly came to an end. In 1992, drilling officially stopped. Not because scientists had reached hell, not because they had uncovered something terrifying, but because they had reached the limits of both engineering and history itself. Today, the Kola Superdeep Borehole doesn't look like one of humanity's greatest scientific achievements. If you visited the site, you might walk right past it without realizing what you're looking at. The drilling towers are gone. Most of the research buildings have been abandoned. Windows are shattered, metal rusts beneath Arctic snow. Nature has slowly reclaimed what was once one of the Soviet Union's most ambitious scientific projects, and the hole itself, it's almost impossible to see. The deepest point humanity has ever reached is hidden beneath a small, circular metal cap, barely wider than a dinner plate. Underneath that cover lies more than 12 kilometers of empty space stretching into the Earth's crust, a record that has stood for over 35 years. People often imagine that the greatest discoveries in history end with dramatic moments, a hidden treasure, a lost civilization, proof that changes everything. The Kola borehole wasn't like that. There was no single revelation. Instead, it changed science, one discovery at a time. It showed that the Earth's crust was far more complicated than researchers had believed. It revealed ancient fossils buried beneath miles of rock. It uncovered water where none was expected. And perhaps most importantly, it reminded scientists how much they still didn't know. There's something almost humbling about the Kola Superdeep Borehole. Humanity crossed oceans, climbed the tallest mountains, walked on the moon, sent spacecraft beyond the edge of our solar system. Yet when we tried exploring the planet beneath our own feet, we barely made it 7.5 miles. That sounds impressive. Until you realize the Earth is nearly 4,000 miles from the surface to its center. The deepest hole we've ever drilled reaches less than 0.2% of the way there. Imagine scratching the skin of an apple and claiming you've explored its core. That's how little we've actually seen. Maybe that's why the story of the Kola borehole became surrounded by myths. Because when people encounter something they can't fully understand, they often fill the unknown with stories. Demons, voices, secrets hidden beneath the Earth. The truth, however, is no less mysterious. The deeper we drilled, the more the planet surprised us. And even today, the greatest unexplored frontier on Earth isn't hidden somewhere in space. It's still directly beneath our feet. So the next time someone tells you the Soviets drilled into hell, remember this. They didn't find demons. They didn't hear the cries of the damned. What they discovered was something much more unsettling. That after centuries of science and the deepest hole humanity has ever drilled, we still know remarkably little about the world beneath us. Because sometimes, the greatest mystery isn't what's hiding in the darkness. It's realizing just how close that darkness has been all along.